What's up, everybody? I'm Reverend Nia.
I'm Minister Wallace.
My name is Reverend Tiff, and welcome to Millennial Conversations.
Millennial Conversations is a Bible study specifically for young adults where we teach through dialogue and have candid conversations from an emerging generation of leaders.
Be sure to repost and share with the hashtag RTMC. That means Read Temple Millennial Conversations. And don't forget to engage with us in the chat.
You can tune in to our Read Temple website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel every Thursday at 7 p.m. So grab your pens,
grab your notebooks,
and join us for tonight's rap session. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Millennial Conversations. I hope you all have been joining us all month long so far as we highlight and celebrate millennial men. And with being just a few days shy of Father's Day, tonight I have two special guests with us on tonight, and they're going to introduce themselves at this time, and we'll start with Jason.
Good evening, everybody. I am Jason Jordan Griffin. I serve as the pastor of Union Memorial in Baltimore City. It's a United Methodist congregation, and just excited to be with you all on tonight.
And my name is Reverend Ronald. I'm over at Island Chapel AME in Southeast DC under the dynamic leadership of Reverend Dr. Michael Ebell Sr. Oh, and I do have a plug. I have a catering business, First Sundays Cafe, where we like to say we provide you food for the soul.
Amen. Awesome. Thank you both so much. These gentlemen are millennial fathers who are also serving in ministry. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight is fatherhood and ministry. Listen, make sure y'all repost and share using the hashtag RTMC. That stands for Read Temple Millennial Conversations. Tag your millennial father friends in so that we can all learn and share and grow together on tonight. And so as you've already heard, tonight's discussion is going to be about fatherhood and how these men are balancing fatherhood and work life and ministry and all of that together. And so we're going to jump right in, and we'll start with Ronald. How do you do it, man?
When I look at fatherhood and when I look at balancing life, I think about one familiar story, and not to get all churchy, but just one familiar story in Matthew when Jesus was on the boat sleeping. And there was a storm that was surrounding. And as we know, we are living in some times where there's many different types of storms going on. And as a father, what I have to do is I have to learn how to rest. I have to rest in the fact that that everything is going to be okay. I have to rest in the fact that I raise and raising my children in the correct way. I have to rest in the fact that my covering, my protection is going to transcend to wherever they are. So life is about balance, but life also is about assurance. And the assurance is coming through the vein that no matter what life throws at you, that you still have the opportunity to rest. And I believe as fathers, we have to learn how to sometimes take our hands off. And that's what that story in Matthew and in Mark talks about. It just, Jesus took his hand off of the situation. He like, look, why are y'all tripping? I'm on vacation trying to get to the other side, and y'all coming and disturbing my rest. But there's a nugget that you could pull out of that. And that one thing is that no matter what life throws at you, no matter what storms are facing you, no matter what ministry is throwing at you, no matter what, when it comes to pastoral ministry, Jason as a pastor, no matter what pastoral difficulties and roof leaks and people walking out of the ministry, no matter what comes your way, you still got to find a sense of rest. And so that's what I found that has been important, even with my wife's pushing, that I have to find a sense of and a time of rest in order to be efficient. And so what God did was he got up out of his sleep and he talked to the storm and said, peace, be still. And he gave the deuces and he went on back to sleep. Yes, and so that's what we have to do in fatherhood. Sometimes we got to wake up, address it, and leave it in God's hands.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I'm 100% there with you on the rest piece. I'm coming back off of a 4-month Sabbath leave, and it was so needed. And one of the things that God really spoke to me during my preparation for that leave was a need to be reconnected. I think to not only God first and foremost, but reconnected to my first ministry, which is supposed to be my family, my wife and my children. And so I think when we begin to have the conversation about balancing fatherhood and ministry, there's an understanding that these are two extremely important areas that, we are being called to pour into as men, as millennial men. And so from a biblical perspective, we're reminded that our first real ministry is, of course, to our families. And so we can't be all in, with respect to the church and then be half stepping at home. And so it's so important that you find that balance and strike it. The book of Proverbs, talks about balance. And what God is saying, even in the book of Proverbs is that essentially that where there is no balance, or at least where there's a false balance, it's an abomination unto the Lord. That's what scripture tells us. In other words, God is not happy if we don't have balance in our lives. And, one of the things that I remember when I was an undergrad student, I remember this, I was up in Boston, attending college. I was going over to Cambridge to a church. The church was called PT Tabernacle, and Bishop Brian C. Green was there. And I remember around that time, I'd already received my call to ministry. I knew I always wanted to have children of my own. And he said something one Sunday morning that was so profound, so prophetic, and it sticks with me even to this day. He said, when I die, he said, I don't want my children to stand up and say, he was an amazing pastor. He was just a wonderful ministry leader. He just did amazing things for the kingdom. He said, I don't want my children having that to be their first utterance, because that was not my primary relationship to them. My primary relationship to them was dad. And that stuck with me. That is somebody that was very young, like I said, in undergrad, maybe my senior year of undergrad when I got my call to ministry. And I always knew I wanted to be a family man. And I'm just like, wow, I got to remember that. And I did. And, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more. And I had some bumps in the road the first time around. I didn't get it right the first time around, but thanks be to God. God is a God of a second chance, as the songwriter said. And, and I'm living that second chance now to the best of my ability with God's help. So definitely got to find balance.
Well, Jason, you mentioned the bumps. So let's talk about what those bumps were like.
Wow. Yeah. So I definitely, I'll just say, that when I entered into ministry. I think when I got my first church appointment, I had been married for about a year and a half. And 3 weeks into the appointment, my very first child was born. My daughter was born. But 2 days before that, the church that I was assigned to pastor caught on fire, literally caught on fire. It was a late night fire where an electrical outlet, caused everything to kind of just go up in flames. And so I spent the whole first, I would say, 4 to 5 months of ministry, being in ministry, being a new dad, immersed in building reconstruction and meeting with folks about that. And, I just knew that these people wanted to get back in their building. We were worshiping at a hotel nearby. And, I'm just like, oh gosh, they got to get back to the building. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy at the building trying to get church back up and running, and forgot at some points that I was a new dad. Now, there were a lot of times I was carrying the baby with me to the job, but there were some things that weren't always getting done at home with respect to being a father and being a husband that, I can say definitely attributed in some ways to the breakdown of my first marriage. So, definitely important to recognize that, that there is a home, that you have to go to, and you're going to spend more time, and you should be spending more time at that home than you are spending at the household of God, because you can't sleep there. The pews, even if you got padded pews, they ain't comfortable at all. So, I would definitely say that was a bump in the road that taught me something. And when I entered into a marriage the second time around, I was very clear, that my first ministry was to my wife, was to my children, and everything else, had to come second to that.
Wow. It's funny that you spoke about time. And when I think about fatherhood and when I think about ministry, I think about priorities. Because sometimes the conflict happened and you spoke about it, you dwelled over it. But when it comes to, in my opinion, when it came to, or some of my circumstance, when it came to ministry, that was the easy part. They understood church. They understood the quarterly conferences. They understood annual conferences. But it's those things outside of church that sometimes take up a lot of our time. For me, it was the catering business. I'm all in. Like, I mean, my wife, she's so supportive, but sometimes even in ministry, we take the support of our family for granted, and think that their investment as support is their job, and it really is not.
Yeah.
Their job is, yes, they support us, but it's not their job to be what we are. Right. And I had to take a step back, and it only took through the tears of my wife to really understand that my family needs me. Yes, these crab cakes are good. Yes, yes, these cakes are good. Yes, going to church is awesome. Yes, I'm being fed, but at the end of the day, my family is left without a meal. And it's not that meal of a plate, but it's the meal of my presence. And so I had to realize that no matter what is going on, no matter who's calling, my family is my first ministry.
Yeah.
And I think once we prioritize that, then the time will fall in place.
But I think, Ronald, you hit the nail on the head when you said time. Ecclesiastes talks about, to everything there is a season. There's a time and place for everything under heaven. And, and I love how the passage of scripture goes back and forth. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to dance, a time to mourn. And it says that there is a time for everything. We have to be intentional, I think, about how we are spending our time.
Yes,
and, and we can't allow any one thing to monopolize too much of it, because then that goes back, to what God was saying over in Proverbs. It becomes an abomination. Too much of anything is not good for you.
Correct.
Too much of anything is not good for you. And I think, the more we embrace that, the intentionality of putting time in with spouse, putting time in with kids, and a big thing here is a word, boundaries. boundaries in ministry. You know, sometimes saying, you know, I can't do this. Let me say this. I used to be, if the phone rang, no matter what the hour, you know, I'm coming. You know, somebody's at the hospital, you know, I'm coming. I'm getting out my bed. I'm going, you know, I got to go. And now I've looked at it to say, if something happens to someone late in the midnight hour, the same thing that I'm going to be doing over the phone is the same thing that I'm going to be doing in person. And, you know, you just have to use discernment. You know, is this a situation that I definitely need to show face at? Because sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But every time it is not.
What we have to also understand is when you spoke about there's a time for everything, a season for everything. The Bible talks about that we ought to train up a child. And if we're going to take the time to do that training, then we have to be intentional, as you already said, to make sure that we're in place. Because a lot of times as men, we're looking for results, but we're never in place. And so if we're in place to do the training, then the result that we want to see will be manifested in front of our eyes. And so I had to learn and to experience, especially because my oldest daughter is not my biological, but she's mine. I had to learn some of the things that the training that she went through on the other side is not the result that I want to see on my side. And so I had to stop and look at her and say, you know what? The training that I want to see is the investment of time I got to put in.
Yeah.
And so we're now at that stage of a turning point, because now I'm starting to see the fruit of that investment.
Hallelujah. It's something on the other side.
Yes, sir. I'm starting to see the fruit of that training. And I believe just like we get trained in seminary, just like there's training at church, we have to remember as fathers, we got to put some training in with our children. And it's not just whippings. It's not just read a book. It's most of our presence, because that's where a lot of children go astray, is because they don't have the ministry of presence.
Wow.
Dad is there. I know my dad is going to show up. I know my dad is going to be there when I go to sleep. I know he's working at the church, but he always put me first.
Yeah.
If we learn that balance, I think that our children will be in a better place mentally, with life, period.
Yeah, it's funny. Before I came in, so we're, you know, like I said, I've got a new 14, turned 14 yesterday, 13, 12, and 11. So right there at that middle school age, that hormonal age.
Oh, we praying for you, Jason.
That let me try you age, you know, all of that, you know, just for the plead the blood of Jesus over our household, over my wife and I. Hallelujah. Because, you know, we was going through 2021, we was going through as they were starting to spread their little wings. But it's amazing. You talked about on the other side. Like I said, my oldest son, and we're a blended family as well. You know, the oldest three, you know, were from my wife's previous relationship. The youngest is from my previous relationship. We're a blended family. I'm gonna do the plug as well. I'm working on a book called Blended and Blessed, talking about you know, how life is had us come together for a reason, and because of that reason, we're finding out that we're even more blessed than we were apart. But the oldest said to me, when I was coming downstairs, she said, well, what you getting ready to do? Because he's on his way to basketball practice. My wife's taking him. I said, well, I got an interview. He said, oh, what about? I said, oh, it's getting ready, you know, for Father's Day, talking about fatherhood. I said, well, let me ask you. I said, before I go into the interview, I said, is there anything that I can do better as a dad? You know, and he just kind of looked at me, you know, 14, you know, he's just like, nah. I'm just like, well, wait a minute. I said, so are you saying that I'm doing a good job? He said, he looked at me up and down, you know, he's like, it would seem that way. And then just walks off. And I'm just like, well, thank you, you know, for the support, the vote of confidence. But I'm going to say, we've come a long way with that, with the 14-year-old. You know, this used to be a 14-year-old that you say something and he be looking at you. So even that bit of, you know, a thumbs up, that bit of affirmation goes a long way. And I think to that point, hearing from them is so important, or I would say better word, listening, because the difference between listening and hearing, listening to what they're saying, and the heart of the matter goes a long way in helping you learn how to parent your child, because there's no manual for parenthood. There is no manual for fatherhood. What works for Ronald may not work for me. What may work for me may not work for Ronald. And it's on the job training. Daily on the job training, and with preteens and teenagers, that thing can switch up on a dime in a minute. Sir.
Absolutely, man, and thank you both for what you've already shared so far. But even regardless of the being blended families between the two, do you find it? And Ronald, you can answer it first. Do you find it any more difficult in raising the children that aren't biologically yours?
It's not difficult. There's growing pains, and with any relationship, there has to be a sense of you have to be intentional about it. In the beginning, to be honest, my feelings was hurt. I'm like, she ain't talking to me. She ain't said nothing to me. I'm taking her to the amusement park. She ain't say thank you. I'm buying this girl clothes. She just looking at me like I supposed to do it. But with commitment and consistency and communication, that thing turned full circle. Now I'm daddy. I heard those words come out of her mouth. Yeah, I melted. And I had to go to my wife and say, like, how did we get to this point? And she said, because you've been consistent. And that's all a child needs. When you're not biologically the father, or even biologically the mom, or however it may work out, just be intentional and don't have expectations of a response. Because when you have expectations of a response based upon what you're doing, you'll get your feelings hurt. Yeah. But when you sit back and say, I'm genuinely in this for the long haul, no matter what type of response they give me, okay, I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy them jeans. I'm gonna buy them jeans this time. I'm gonna do it tomorrow. Oh Lord, I'm gonna do it again, because my goal is not to people please you, right? But my goal is to connect with you. And when there's connection, there's power in that. But if you're pleasing, that's just in a moment. And so I had to realize these things that I'm doing it for the moment. I'm trying to get gratification and satisfying myself by saying, oh man, she said thank you. Oh, cool. But now that we have a relationship and there's connection, oh, I'm good. I know when Alea sees me, I'm daddy, we good. Daddy, what you do today? Like there's that connection now. Yeah. So I would say that just be intentional about communicating.
Yeah. Wow. That just hearing you, knows, that, I'm not alone. I have not been alone, and I definitely can say that I'm a ways away from that early on. I think for us, one of the blessings was for us that I came into my three older kids' lives, and my wife came into our younger daughter's life when they were 5, 4, and 3. So they were early enough. We were early enough in where some of the things that tend to be said, you're not my real dad, you're not my mom, where those things weren't gonna be the elephant in the room that you were just waiting to hear. We had enough time and space to begin to build, or as you talked about, being intentional and building those relationships with them in such a way that we knew that, the time put in was going to yield the type of relationship that we were ultimately looking for. One of the things that as I was doing, looking at our situation, and as I've been working on my book, one of the things that I talk about in one of the chapters is uncovering our individual feelings. And that's a recognition that everybody in the mix, as I talk about, everybody has their own feelings. And so I talk about the three things. I said that there are unanswered questions, there are unresolved issues, and unchecked emotions that every member of the family is bringing to the table. And it may be a little bit easier for us as adults to communicate than it is for kids, especially younger kids. And so you got to be patient. Patience is a virtue. That's something that I definitely have worked on and learned along the way. And like you were saying, Ronald, you know, not having these expectations of children, especially who have had to do some adjusting as well.
Yes,
you
sir.
know, when it's not their biological parent, or if their relationship ended and it ended, you know, in turmoil, or if it ended, you know, without there being any real establishment of relationship, they got all this stuff swirling around in their head. And if they're in your household, you know, you're going to be the first person that gets it. You're going to be the first person that gets the sting of, you know, their remark that isn't necessarily always the kindest. You know, you're going to be the first person that gets the sting, you know, of something that they do that, you know, that you're trying to make sense. Well, you know, why would they do that? And I'm, you know, putting in this, and I'm putting in this time and putting in this energy. But, you know, one of the things that my wife and I had decided, you know, very early on when we got married, is that we wanted to provide for our children what we did not have. And so that's always been what we go back to. Okay, at the end of the day, you know, are we providing a stable environment? Are we providing sound emotional support? Are we providing, you know, a safe place where, you know, they can come and lay their issues? Are we providing, you know, resources that allow them to be able to flourish and grow and develop? And so, you know, at the end of the day, when we see on the other side that you were talking about earlier, that's happening, even if in the thick of it is difficult, you know, we can breathe a little bit easier. We can smile, you know, a little bit bigger. So, yeah.
And to that point, if I must say, that when you create that safe place, because again, that was one of my wife and I, that was one of our goals to, you know, it's not about houses, cars, and money, but it's about creating a legacy through that.
Yes.
So that what you saw and now what you see, you now have the potential to do it also. So you may have been in turmoil all over there, especially as a blended family. You may see that, and now you see better over here. Now allow that to be your legacy. Allow that to drop in your spirit. So now when you are having your children, Lord Father, touch me, one day down the road, that you remember this situation and not that situation. Right. And so our partnership has created an environment in which we want to be legacy builders. It's just not about dad having a business, working in IT. It's not about mom being in a cybersecurity environment. It's not about that. It's about the legacy that goes behind it. That now you see what it takes to build a home from ground up. Now you see that your homework is important to get that. And so all of these things that both you, Jason, and I, we are experiencing or have experienced and will experience is, I feel as though it's about legacy, because the Bible clearly talks about leaving an inheritance for your children's children. An inheritance for your children's children is not just money, but it's those principles of living that I believe that we are showing our children as fathers that will transcend generations to come.
Yeah, that's why scripture says, train up a child in the way they shall go, and when they're older, they won't depart from it. You know, I know a lot of times, you know, folks talk about, you know, PKs. They say, oh my God, those PKs, but you know, it's in them. You know, we're putting it in them, not just on Sunday morning. We're putting it in them, you know, all the week long. You know, they know that this is you know, we ain't perfect. Let's be clear. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but our foundation is God. You know, when we go left, because sometimes as pastors and as first ladies, you know, the saints, the little saints that belong to you will make you go to the left, but God will bring you back center. Thanks be to God, will bring you back center, get you back on track and say, okay, wait a minute, pump your brakes. Wait a minute. Let's remember who we are and whose we are. And then let's try again. And I think every time that we've had to do that, we've grown. We've grown as a family, and our relationships with our kids have grown, just tremendously. I count it an honor and a privilege to be a dad,
Yes,
and
sir.
to be able to pour in to those that God has blessed me with, because that's something that God didn't have to do, but because He chose me, I want to make sure that I give God my best, not just on Sunday morning, not just when I'm preaching, but when I'm with my offspring.
Amen.
And listen, before we run out of time, I do have one other question I must ask in this space. And so, Jason, you mentioned before about how you create the space for your children to be able to come talk to you. Much like your 14-year-old, and giving him the open-ended opportunity to say, hey, how am I doing as a father? And Ronald, you mentioned also you alluded also to it when you said you leave the space open for your daughter or your children. Is your youngest talking yet?
Jason is saying all that he wants to, but it's goo goo gaga type of talk.
All right. Well, basically, you leave the space open for them to be able to come talk to you. And so when we consider the things that are happening around the world that they also have access to, because for those who, not Jason, not yet anyway, for those who are of school age and are going to school, like what are some practical ways that you may be able to share with other young adult men who have school age children who are now questioning, Daddy, what do I do if there's something happening in my school building, and what if I don't want to go to school, Daddy, because I'm afraid, and how do you practical ways to really address that with your children that may be helpful for another parent? Ronald, we'll start with you.
One way that I try to find out the mental status of Alea is, how was your day? How was your day? What did you do? What did you learn? What did you get out of today? And through that type of dialogue, most of the time it was good. Okay, so what was good about it? Because these 2-word answers is not gonna fly. But what was good about it? And then did you hear about blah 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 blah? Did you experience blah blah blah? Who are your friends? What y'all talking about? Because you kind of talking about hair, but did y'all talk about this, that, or the other? And so those type of conversations, and I don't call them prying conversations, but they're intentional in trying to see where her mental psyche is. And so if I were to give some type of tip to another father, it's be intentional about communication. It goes all the way back. Be intentional about conversation, because at the end of the day, if you don't hear from their heart, you won't know what's going on in their minds. Their heart and their feelings is going to show in their sleeve. If they scared to go to school, you're going to see it through their conversation.
Yeah.
Because eventually it's going to come out. But if you're waiting for the teacher to call, then we have a problem. Yeah. And a lot of times they, the phobia is that the mother gets all the news. We got to change that narrative. The father should know as well. And so you got to be, intentional about conversation, communication, and popping up to the school. Yeah. My mother was big on that. Yes, she was. And so, that's one of the things, I ain't gonna lie to you, I threatened to Leia with. I'll pop up to that school in a minute. Now, have I come up once or twice, just to show you I ain't lying. But those right. One of those things, in order to get a grasp on what they're feeling and how they're doing and what the culture of the school has now turned into, especially with, the more recent shootings and things of that sort, you gotta be there. And you gotta be present, but you also gotta communicate with your child. Yeah.
I think, with respect to that, a great preacher once said, a good pastor should always have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in another hand.
Yes, sir.
As I was going into ministry, we were leaving out of the newspaper age, and we were in social media. And so, one of the ways that, I'm 38 now, And my kids, you know, try to make me feel like I'm old. I'm not old. I'm a millennial. So I still got youth to me. But one of the ways that I decided early on in ministry when I first went into ministry, that I would always keep my hand on the pulse was not only watch the news. My wife's probably more of a news watcher because sometimes it's just too heavy for me, you know, and, you know, with everything else that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis, I kind of get it in spurts, you know, push feeds. But I try to stay up on pop culture. I try to stay up on, as I like to call it, my ratchet news, so that I know what my 13, 14-year-olds, they think they getting one over on me. They think they talking about something as they're talking in the car, because I'm chauffeur dad. I'm chauffeur dad. Now, I take them to school in the morning. I bring them home in the evening. And what I've learned, you talked about, Ronald, those conversations in the morning, preteens and teenagers, you can't talk to them in the morning.
Right,
you know?
right.
They mean in the morning. My wife and I were just talking about that. I said, I don't even try no more, babe, because they just mean in the morning. But in the afternoon, they done been around their peers all day. They lit in the afternoon. So they talking. Oh, I'm ear hustling. They in the back, especially the 14-year-old and the 13-year-old, the boy and the girl. They in the back, they talking, da-da-da, and you see this, that, and the other. So, and they'll say a little phrase, and I'm like, okay, you know, what is that? And I'm on my phone trying to be a good driver. I'm pulling it up on Urban Dictionary. I'm on Urban Dictionary, pulling it up, and then I'm like, oh, so-and-so did da-da-da-da-da, and they like, how you know about that? Da-da-da? I was like, oh, okay. So then I kind of will engage in the conversation with them a little bit to show them that I'm not as uptight as they may think I am, because I know that they ain't doing everything pretty and pristine. You know, we raising them right, but I know that they got outside influences and they're going to be drawn into things. But I engage with them in those conversations, and then always at the end of it, I remind them that may be what's going on over there, but you need to remember that this is the standard in this house. You need to remember that this is what we have taught you. This is what we've shown you. This is for your betterment, not just right now, but later on down the line, because that's what we're looking out for. And I think keeping it, like I say, keep those lines of communication open. I remember the other week when the shooting occurred, you know, we kept it on. You know, we turned the TV on, and they were moving about, and, you know, as they were moving about, you know, they stopped and they listened, and, you know, and it was like, wow, you know, I just said to them, I said, I couldn't even imagine, you know, getting that type of phone call, you know, when I knew that I dropped you off at the door, and having to wonder whether or not you're coming back home. And then immediately after that, you know, I said, you got to stay prayed up. But then I talked about those practical things. I said, you know, you ain't got to be the hero. You know, if something ain't looking right, you know, you let somebody know, you speak up, you know, you bring attention to it, and then you try to get yourself to safety. You try to bring some friends along to safety, but you know, you ain't got to try to be in harm's way. You know, those type of things, being alert, watching your surroundings, you know, not being afraid to be the snitch. All those things is important, because, you know, it could be the difference of a moment that could be life or death for you. And I don't ever want to be that parent that's having to bury a child. And my heart goes out to those folks. There's just been so much of it, but, you know, the best we can do, you know, is try to pray, keep those lines of communication open, and keep ours safe as possible.
That's the truth.
Absolutely, man. Thank you both so very much for your candor, for your transparency, and sharing on tonight some of your triumphs and even some of your trials with balancing fatherhood and ministry, of fatherhood and life. And we are certainly grateful that you both agreed to be on with us tonight and sharing this space with us tonight. But we don't ever want to take for granted that everyone that's tuning in tonight knows who the Heavenly Father is, knows who Jesus is. And so if you're watching tonight and you are unsaved, you don't know what it means to be saved, or you are unsure if you're saved, I invite you to make a bold faith move on tonight and type in the chat, "It's me." Maybe you're already saved, but you don't have a church home where you are growing, not just where you are going. And if you believe that the Lord is leading you to the Reed Temple AME Church, I will that you would make a bold faith move and type in the chat, "It's me." Maybe you're already saved and you have a church home where you are growing, not just where you're going, but maybe you want to recommit or rededicate your life back to Christ. What does that mean? That means you and Jesus, y'all had a great, wonderful, viable, functioning relationship, but you and Jesus had a falling out and y'all broke up. And you decided you wanted to go live your life like it was golden, and you starting to realize now, listen, I can't do this thing without God. Listen, the saving grace is that God has never left his position.
Yes.
And so if you're saying tonight, God, I'm sorry, I've tried this thing called life independent of you, and now I want to live this life depending upon you, I will that you would make a bold faith move and type in the chat, it's me. Now, maybe you haven't grown as bold in your faith just yet, and that's fine. No shade, no condemnation here, but I will that you would head on over to www.readtemple.org/cares, and someone will most certainly be in communication with you. Last and certainly not least, if you would like to sow a seed into the life of this ministry, not just Reed Temple AME Church, not just Millennial Conversations, but the church at large, so that we can continue to do the work of the Lord in the church as well as in the community, I will that you would follow the directions that are on your screen right now, and whatever seed, no matter how great, no matter how small, that you would sow your seeds on tonight, and do so with a cheerful heart. Again, thank you so much to the pastor, the Reverend, is it Reverend Doctor?
Yeah.
Reverend Dr. Jason
Hallelujah.
and Reverend Ronald Wilson Jr. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Listen, y'all, join us next week for another Millennial Conversations, and happy Father's Day to each and every one of the fathers on tonight.
Amen. Happy Father's Day. God bless you.